if you ask anybody based in a hospital, is it safe to have a breech baby at home? They're going to panic and say, no way, you're going to,
Right.
it's dangerous. But then like, why won't you do it at the hospital? It's too dangerous. So I'm sure that's the extent of the conversation a lot of times.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Birth Lounge podcast. Happy November, you guys. I know it may feel a little bit early, but I wanted to go ahead and give you a heads up about our Black Friday sale because this is one of only 2 sales that we do every single year. And I want to be super transparent with you. I don't run sales on the Birth Lounge except for Mother's Day and Black Friday because, to be completely honest, the Birth Lounge is priced fairly. So there's very little room that I have to run a sale and still be able to have a business, to be completely honest. I don't actually inflate my prices because I want this information to be accessible to everybody year round. And so that's why I don't have a lot of sales. We literally run a sale on Mother's Day to say thank you to you guys. And then again on Black Friday for anybody who missed the Mother's Day sale or has gotten pregnant between Mother's Day and now the end of the year. So I give you 2 chances to get into the Birth Lounge at a little bit of a reduced price. But other than that, there are no sales. Now, let me tell you about the Birth Lounge because it is literally unhinged. It is like nothing else you're going to find out there on the market. And that is the way that we are able to have the results that we have. We have people that literally walk away with absolutely zero birth trauma and they achieve all of their birth goals and they have no tearing. They push for less than 30 minutes. And the best one yet is that we have just a 3% C-section rate. Yeah, I am able to help you truly go into the hospital system, navigate the conversations with your provider, stay in control from start to finish, and avoid unwanted interventions and unnecessary things like an unnecessary C-section or an unnecessary induction. So how can this be? Well, I'm teaching you the control method, which is going to help you understand all of the aspects of labor that are within your control. And then we're going to teach you how do you control them. The problem that I find with a lot of traditional childbirth ed classes is that they just teach you your options. They say, well, you can have this or you can have that, and these are what your options are. But then when you get in the hospital system, you find that you're getting pushback from staff, or you are feeling like you don't really have those options, or maybe you're feeling pressured and you don't know how to navigate those conversations. That's exactly what I teach you how to do. I'm deconstructing all of those barriers, those road bumps, those things that hold you up from actually achieving your goals, because just knowing your options is not enough. The Birth Lounge is a comprehensive course. So when you go with the Birth Lounge, you will not need any other form of preparation when it comes to preparing for your birth. Inside the Birth Lounge, you are going to learn stages of labor, the ins and outs of navigating the hospital system, how to engage in respectful collaborative conversation with your medical team, pain relief options, labor positions, pushing positions, how to reduce tearing, how do you avoid things like induction, C-section, and unnecessary interventions? And finally, how do you advocate for your goals so that you can say yes to the things that matter to you? You can request alternatives when that's appropriate, and you can decline things that don't feel good to you. Plus, in the lifetime membership, you're going to get free access to our Dad Days course, which is a comprehensive course made for male partners to help them understand how can they best support you in pregnancy? What is their role in labor and delivery? How do they advocate for you? How can they keep you comfortable and provide pain relief during the birth experience? And then finally, what is their role in postpartum and how do they help you navigate this new space of becoming a mom in the best way possible? You're also going to get access for free for our secret sauce to pushing. This is where I teach you how to achieve those results I talked about in the beginning, pushing for less than 30 minutes, avoiding tearing, and really understanding what muscles to engage to properly push your baby out. First of all, your pelvic floor does not push your baby out. That lady needs to yield out of the way. So what muscles do you use? That's exactly what I'm teaching you in the secret sauce to pushing. And yes, I'm teaching you how to push with an epidural and without an epidural. Don't worry, I don't really care how you birth your baby. I want you to be equipped no matter what pops up in your labor because this is your birth. I want you to choose how you want to do it. My job is to make sure that no matter what choice you make, you feel empowered in doing that. You're also going to get one of my number one downloads, which is our scripts for advocacy. This is an entire packet of the most common conversations that you're going to face in labor and in the end of pregnancy that often start you down this slippery slope of handing over your control. Not only do I provide you with the evidence to have these conversations, but I'm actually giving you the words to have these conversations, i.e. the scripts for advocacy. In addition to that, you're going to get all of my PDF guides, partner guides, epidural guides, induction cheat sheets, and my brand new Birthing Your Big Ass Baby course where I step you through the actual data of truly evaluating whether your baby is going to be quote unquote big or not. What does ACOG say? What does the AAP say? And what are the true medical recommendations when it comes to suspected macrosomia, i.e. a big baby? I think you might be surprised to learn that less than 1% of all babies in the US are born truly meeting the criteria for macrosomia. So why are inductions and C-sections so common? Well, that's exactly what I'm teaching you in the Birthing Your Big Ass Baby course, and I'm going to teach you how you can decline those if they don't feel aligned to you. And finally, probably my favorite perk of the lifetime membership is you get a box that is handpicked by me, curated to help you have your best birth possible. This is a birth box that includes all of my favorite things, not only that I have used for the last 10 years to help women achieve their best births, but the same tools that I'm using in my own birth. Things like a TENS unit, a rebozo, a comb for pain relief, self-care items, breastfeeding items, and so much more. One of my favorite things is actually the fuzzy socks. I love them. They're so soft. Oh my gosh. This box is packed with goodies. It's worth over $120, and I'm sending it to you because I want you to be equipped to have the absolute most glorious and joyous birth experience that you possibly can. And I know that you can't do that without having the proper tools. And so not only do I teach you how to use those in the birth lounge, but I'm gifting them to you because I want them to be part of your birth bag. So for 5 days only on November 24th through the 28th, you will be able to take advantage of our lifetime membership and $150 off. You can visit thebirthlounge.com/join to take advantage of this special Black Friday deal. Again, 5 days only, November 24th through the 28th, using code BF25 at thebirthlounge.com/join. Again, that code is BF25, 5 days only, thebirthlounge.com/join. Do not miss out on this. If you miss this sale, you'll have to wait till Mother's Day. I genuinely cannot wait to help you have your best birth possible. I'll see you in the lounge. Bye. Hello. Today's episode is a re-air. One of the things that we did while I was preparing for mat leave is we looked at two things: our most popular podcast episodes and our most requested podcast episodes. And so then we took those episodes and we decided to re-air them while I am on maternity leave to help you continue to get the best, most up-to-date, and most requested information and education while I am away. So today's episode is a re-air. You will be able to find today's guest bio in the show notes along with any of the links, and we will note what episode number the original episode was in the show notes as well. So I hope that you enjoy today's re-air, and please know that you guys are absolutely on my mind. I'm hanging out over on Instagram, so head over there and say hi. Otherwise, enjoy today's episode. Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of the Birth Lounge podcast. Today I'm joined by a very special guest and a topic that I'm so passionate about. I'm so excited to have Dr. Rixa Freeze with me today. She is a research professor and also the president of Breech Without Borders. Dr. Rixa, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thanks for being here. I'm very, very excited to talk about breech birth. I think that it is something that people really want a lot of information on. It's very hard to find information on. And when you do find the information, it's really hard to then have conversations, whether that be with your partner, your family, your friends, your mom's group, your OB, your midwife. We have found that not all midwives are even on board with breech birth. Breech is its very own special category. So starting there, can you tell us what are the basics that we need to know when we are talking about breech birth?
Yeah. Well, I'll start really basic and explain what it is. Most people who are listening to your podcast probably know, but in case they don't, it's when the baby comes out butt or knees or feet first rather than head first. And it's about 3 to 4% at term, and the earlier the baby is, the more preterm it is, the more likely it will be breech. So if you have an extremely preterm baby, it's something like 25% of all of them will be breech. So babies tend to be in different positions during pregnancy, and as it gets closer to their due date, they tend to settle head down. But there's a certain number of babies that don't, and they just stay head up for whatever reason. Sometimes we know why, but most of the time we actually still don't even know why. So there's some genetic component to it. Breech tends to run in families. There's some component due to uterine shape. Sometimes if you have certain abnormally shaped uterus, like a bicornuate or unicornuate uterus, sometimes it might be due to a condition that the baby has. It might have some neurological unusual things going on that lead it to not flip around and turn down. But honestly, most of the time, we still don't know why some babies choose to remain breech and the rest of them turn around and come out head first.
What about if you had a breech birth before? Are you more likely to have a breech baby with subsequent pregnancies?
You are. And the more breech babies you have, the more likely your next one will be. So like if you've already had 2 breeches or 3 breeches, I would highly suspect that you might have a uterine anomaly that predisposes your baby to sitting that way. And I would be prepared to have another breech baby. So it's not a guarantee. I mean, if you've had a breech baby once, I think it's something like a 10% recurring chance that your next one will be, which is more than the average, but not a guarantee. But certainly the more you have, then the more likely the next one will be.
Sure. And how do we treat breech births differently? So what kind of conversation should we be having with our providers if we find that our baby is breech and we're interested in having a breech delivery?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the big difference nowadays is that the vast majority of providers are not adequately trained and are not adequately experienced, and thus not confident in their ability to safely attend a vaginal breech birth. In a setting with providers who are well trained and comfortable doing it, the conversation doesn't necessarily need to be a lot different. There's a small subset of risks that are a little bit different for breech babies rather than head down babies. Some of it's due to the mode of birth, whether you have a C-section or vaginal birth. And some of the risk is just due to having a breech baby. There's a little bit of unique risks that come with a baby who's lying breech, doesn't matter which way it's born. So really the big conversation in a United States setting, and in a setting in many places around the world, frankly, is, can I even find somebody who knows what they're doing to attend me? That's the most important one that most people will have nowadays. And if you're in the situation where you find out at 35, 36, 37 weeks, 39 weeks that your baby's breech, you're going to find out very quickly that there's probably nobody to help you out. Or if there is somebody, you have to search far and wide and maybe call 30 different providers and maybe drive a couple hours across state lines in order to have a vaginal birth. So that's what's really shocking for a lot of women who discover a breech pregnancy, is this feeling of abandonment. All of a sudden, there's not a single person who can take care of them, short of just doing a surgery that they don't want and they probably don't need. And that's the biggest conversation, and that's what predominates most women's experiences, is the stress of trying to find a provider and realizing that they don't have options.
Yeah, because not only is it really not a wide skill, not a lot of providers possess this, but once you get that close to your due date, the providers that do have the skills, they're typically filled up. Their calendars are full, or they can't take on any new clients, or they're not comfortable taking you that late. It really is a very stressful time for a lot of people. Okay, so you talked about not, having a surgery that you may not need. Talk to us about the safety of breech birth, because this is what I find, and I think my team would agree, that we find is the most problematic conversation. Providers are really scared of breech births. And so then they use fear-based language, and it kind of breeds fear into the person who has the breech baby.
Yeah, most providers who are educated today have an impression that breech birth is extremely dangerous, that it's almost a guarantee that your baby will die if you have a vaginal birth, that the danger is so high that even considering it is not reasonable at all. And that's typically the conversation that happens. It gets shut down very quickly. And the implication is, why on earth would you kill your baby?
Right.
Why would you want to do that? When in fact, when you actually look at the research, the risk of a breech birth is very, very small. And so I'm going to talk you through some of the numbers quite briefly to give you an idea of what we're talking about when we talk about, is breech birth dangerous? Now, the first thing to consider too is, when we talk about risk, we have to ask, risk to whom? And when is that risk happening? Because actually there's a lot of different things to consider, and each one is different. So you have the risk to the baby, and that's what most people always think about. Is the baby going to die or suffer some major injury, right? But we also have to consider risks to the mother, which are very real for your choices when you're looking at vaginal birth versus a C-section. We also have to think about the long-term risk for the child who's born. So as that breech baby then grows up and goes through childhood and adolescence, are there any long-term risks to the way it's born? Of course, long-term risks to the mother too. And long-term risks, not just to this baby, but if the mother has any future pregnancies and future children, what are the risks of the mode of birth for the breech baby on any future children? So there's 5 main categories we have to think about: short and long-term for the mother, short and long-term for the baby, and then also risks to the next child if there are more children. So let me walk you through each of them really briefly. I have really long, well-researched lectures going into this more if you're into these kinds of things. So I don't have time to get into the statistical details, but you can look it up and check all the sources if you're interested. So let's talk first off short-term risk to the baby, because that's the one that everybody tends to focus on, and in particular, the risk of perinatal mortality, the risk of the baby dying during labor or in the first 28 days after the birth. What we know from the research literature over the last 20 years, and I can say this with extreme confidence since I've gone through every single study on PubMed on breech from about 1850 to the present, and I have compiled all that data over the last 20 years and put it into a lecture. So this is not me reading somebody else's summary. I've read everybody else's summaries too, but this is me actually going through every single piece of research methodologically and compiling everything I can find. So what we know from the research literature is that in general, on the aggregate, when you look at nationwide data, so this is data collected from like the entire country of Finland, the entire country of France, the entire country of Norway or Sweden, right? In these countries that collect data on a nationwide level that's accurate, is that breech birth adds a small amount of perinatal risk to the baby on the order of magnitude of about 1 in 1,000. So if you look at the baseline risk of having a C-section at 39 weeks prior to labor, if you consider that your baseline risk, against which you're going to compare other options, the risk when you have a breech baby, the risk of the baby dying in that scenario, a planned C-section at 39 weeks, is about 1 in every 2,000 babies, because there's a certain number of babies that will die. It's usually not related to the breech part of things, but a small number will not survive. And that's your baseline risk if you want to consider C-section as the baseline, which in some ways is problematic, but let's just run with that for a second. So if you look at the risk of vaginal birth when a woman has a head down baby, just your regular birth, right? Most people and most providers assume that you're going to plan a vaginal birth, absent a strong indication for a cesarean section, right? Like it's pretty normally accepted that that's what we're going to do. The risk in that situation of the baby dying in the perinatal period is about 1 in every 1,000. Okay, that's just kind of your baseline risk for a planned vaginal birth of a regular boring head down baby. And it's a slightly higher than the planned C-section because you're skipping labor and you're skipping the last couple of weeks of pregnancy. And, things can happen. So you don't have that risk of stillbirth because you've already ended the pregnancy. So there's a slightly higher risk of stillbirth just by being pregnant. And there's also a slightly higher risk of something happening during the labor. So, if you're comparing your baseline C-section at 39 weeks versus a head down planned vaginal birth, it's 1 in 1,000 versus 1 in 2,000, right? So there's a slightly higher risk by just going into labor and having a baby vaginally. And that risk most people accept without blinking an eye, really, because it's understood that there's a lot of risks with C-sections and you don't just want to hand them out like candy, right? Because it's a major surgery. So that's your two risks that we're starting with. And then how does breech come into that picture? What we find looking at the best nationwide data, so this is looking at a lot of births in the aggregate, millions and millions of data points, is that a planned vaginal breech birth in a first world industrialized nation context adds about another risk of 1 in 1,000 chance of perinatal mortality. Okay, so for an overall risk, if you add the risk of the vaginal birth, itself, not the breech part, but just the vaginal part, being pregnant and having a vaginal birth, that's about 1 in 1,000. And then the breech adds another 1 in 1,000 for a combined risk of about 2 in 1,000. Okay, so those are your three kind of comparison points. Yes, breech adds a little bit of risk, but having a baby vaginally and being pregnant adds some risk too. And so only half of the risk of a breech baby is even because of the breech part. The rest of it's just the normal risk that we accept as normal and reasonable by being pregnant and having a baby vaginally anyway. I should also say that, this is nationwide data from a number of countries put together and is an average. What we find is that in countries where obstetricians and midwives never lost the skill of breech and where it's done regularly and where everybody's taught the skills, or in centers where they're specifically breech specialty centers, the data on those outcomes are as good as a planned C-section at 39 weeks. So what we can say with a good amount of confidence is that if you come from a background where you're skilled and experienced and where the people around you are skilled and experienced, that it looks like the risk of perinatal mortality can be eliminated entirely, and it's just as good as a planned C-section at 39 weeks. In other words, there's no benefit to routinely planning a C-section. So we can say that it can be just as safe as a planned C-section if people are experienced and skilled. And I think that's a really important point to emphasize, because we have made breech birth more dangerous by not doing it. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is that providers are skilled and experienced and get to practice and do this. And the very fact that they don't know how to do it guarantees that it's going to be dangerous. And we're in a catch-22 because at some point you have to start doing it to be able to become experienced. And most people are so scared of starting to do something that they don't know how to do well, that it's just not even a consideration. And there's liability, and there's malpractice insurance, and there's pressure from your risk management people at the hospital, and state medical boards or midwifery regulation boards. But I'm going to say it, if you don't do breech birth, you're making breech birth more dangerous by not doing it. So skill and experience lead to better outcomes. So that's the short-term look at what happens to the baby, right? Now, this is in contrast to the big study 20 years ago, the term breech trial, that effectively ended vaginal breech birth around the world. It was already on a downward trend, but it really sealed the deal and nailed, the nail in the coffin, whatever expression you want to use. And that study did find a higher rate of perinatal mortality and of severe injury. And it turns out that the study had a lot of flaws in its design, in its recruitment, in its exclusion and inclusion criteria that were not followed well. And it has been since disproven or critiqued so extensively that we can't rely on this out-of-date trial to support our ban on vaginal breech birth, because those data points are outliers. They're not supported by any of the recent evidence over the last 2 decades. So let's move on to the mother, maternal outcomes. So we have short and long term. Short term is kind of during the period of the hospital stay, immediate postpartum period. And unequivocally, vaginal birth is safer for the mother, both in the short term and in the long term. And I don't think anybody's arguing that point. Some studies coming out of the term breech trial found that there was a slightly higher short-term morbidity. Some are finding, larger outcomes, but in any study you look at, pretty much vaginal birth comes out better for the mother, short and long term. And this includes the risk of dying. This includes the risk of having placenta accreta or percreta. This includes the risk of uterine rupture if you have a C-section and then you have a VBAC. This includes the risk of the baby dying for whatever reason. If you have a C-section for a breech baby and you have another baby after that, no matter how the next baby is born, your baby has a higher risk of dying if you had a C-section the first time. So there's, unarguably more risk to the mother, short and long term, if she has a C-section versus a vaginal birth. And this is important if a woman is not absolutely sure that she's done having children when she has this breech baby, whether it's a first or a middle baby. If she thinks there's any chance she's going to have more, then the conversation should be, let's do everything we can to make this birth vaginal, because it's so much safer for you. And then moving on to the last thing that we want to talk about is what happens for future babies and future pregnancies. And unequivocally, it is a lot safer for all the mother's future babies if her breech baby is born vaginally. This is true for both term breech babies and preterm breech babies. Looking at the subsequent baby after, there's a higher chance of the baby dying or having severe problems if the sibling who was breech was born by C-section. And it's largely due to the uterine scar and all the complications that stick with the mother throughout her entire reproductive future by having that cesarean section. And of course, we have to think in a US context where 90+% of all C-sections become repeat C-sections, the VBAC rate is very low. We have to keep that in mind, is that most women are not encouraged or quote unquote allowed to have a VBAC, or a VBAC provider might at best kind of be only mildly supportive, and at the first sneeze or sniffle, off she goes to surgery. And there's always a reason to send her off to surgery, because for whatever reason they're just not comfortable with it, even if they tell the client and they're supportive during pregnancy. You hear a lot about the concept of bait and switch, where providers will say, yeah, I'm VBAC friendly. Yeah, sure, we can do it. And then 39 weeks, oh, baby's too big, baby's too small, pelvis is too big, pelvis is too small, whatever it is, there's always a reason. Oh, I just think it's safer for everybody if we do the C-section. It's just not going to happen. I'm so sorry. There can always be an excuse. And what it comes down to really is, as a provider, you need to be really thoughtful of what you're communicating to your clients. This is for breech or VBAC or twins or whatever. It doesn't serve clients well to be kind of dishonest with them in a way. If honestly you're not really that comfortable with VBAC, but you tell them that you are, and then you always find an excuse to nudge them to cesarean section. So that's just a reality too, is that most women who have a C-section will go on to have more C-sections, and that increases the risk dramatically each time you have another C-section. So we have to think long-term. We can't just think short-term outcomes. Is the baby going to live? That's mostly what we think about. Did the baby survive the birth, and was the baby reasonably healthy and, by the time it left the hospital? And in part, we talk about that because that's what most providers see. They have the baby's born, mom leaves the hospital a few days later, off they go, and they maybe see them at 6 weeks, but that's it. That's, there's not the long-term continuity of care necessarily, that where providers can connect the consequences of their actions and their recommendations like 6 years down the road or 10 years down the road. So the providers probably don't see the long-term ramifications of the decisions that happen around a birth, that might continue years later, but that provider might not make that connection because they might not know. Or even the emotional downstream effects of a woman who felt like she had no choice and she was forced or coerced into having surgery and felt like all of her autonomy and control over her body was stripped away. It's really, really traumatic. But her physician might not see that and might not ever know that that's going on. So that's, in a nutshell, that's kind of the risks and benefits, long and short term, of the situation that we're in now. And this is mostly, in reference to term breech. Preterm is a little bit different, but what we can say with a lot of confidence is that most preterm breech births aren't any more dangerous, or if they are, it only adds a small amount of risk, because most of the risk in a preterm birth isn't the breech part. If it's breech, it's mostly just the prematurity itself. The breech just adds a tiny bit. But even with preterm, most can be born breech as well. We're finding this from countries that still do quite a bit of vaginal breech births for preterm babies too.
Sure. Okay, y'all, you know how we're always on the search for clean brands that are going to be transparent with the ingredients and the things that they put in their products? Well, I finally have found one, and I've been using their protein powder for the last 6-7 months, and I have to say, I officially love them. I do. Just Ingredients is slowly becoming my go-to place for so many things that I use in my daily life, because I can see exactly what they put in their products, and there's no fillers, there's nothing, that we don't want, nothing undesirable, nothing that I can't pronounce, and I'm like, what is that? They have electrolytes. I mentioned the protein powders. They have magnesium. We know how important that is in pregnancy as well. Fish oil for people who are trying to conceive, and they actually just launched pancake and muffin mix, which I'm going to snag in my next order. And I just ordered bone broth, but I haven't had a chance to try it. Super excited for that. They also have beauty products if you have been looking to switch to a clean and minimal brand. Not only do I love Just Ingredients because they're so transparent, but I love their commitment to using real ingredients and encouraging their consumers to become educated on optimal health and wellness, how they can support their bodies and their minds, and how do you actually understand the products that are in your life and where you might want to swap out different things. I'll never be a gatekeeping girly, and I will always test out products before I share them with you guys, because I want to make sure that what I'm recommending is an honest recommendation and you can trust that it will be safe with you and your family. If you want to check out Just Ingredients, go to justingredients.us, so not .com, justingredients.us, and you can use the savings code Tranquility by HeHe, HeHe, Tranquility by HeHe, to save 10% off of your first order. Nothing makes me happier than to help you get healthier, and this is one of the brands that I love and trust, so I wanted to share it with you. All right, bye. So what do we know about breech birth in the hospital versus home birth? Anything?
This is a tricky question because the amount of hospital data we have compared to the amount of home birth data for breeches is so vastly different. We have millions of data points for hospital birth outcomes, and we have very, very few data points for home birth outcomes. And the home birth outcomes are not systematically collected in like national registries the same way that a hospital birth would be. So for example, in a lot of these European countries like Norway, Sweden, France, they have national registries where 99 point something percent of all the births in the entire country get entered in, and they have a great deal of data. It's almost like linking a hospital record. It's not like our US birth certificate data, which is very sparse. So they have detailed birth information that's on these national perinatal registries, and then you can do all these amazing research projects with them. In contrast, home birth doesn't have any systematic way of collecting the information, especially the information that's detailed and verifiable. Birth certificate data is extremely problematic for collecting any sort of detailed information on outcomes like breech, because it doesn't ask any relevant questions or information that would actually be useful, including like, was this a planned home birth? Did they even know it was breech beforehand? So we do have some information, but it's really limited. And what we know is that the information we have, which only has like something like 500 something breech births total in the entire database, does show a higher rate of perinatal mortality in a home setting versus a hospital setting, but with the caveat that this data that we have is extremely limited. We don't have any information on whether it was known or unknown in advance, whether what kind of breech it was, the education level of and training level of the provider, all this information that we typically have when we have hospital-based data. So it's really hard to compare the home versus hospital because of the relative dearth of information that we have on home breech outcomes. What I can say is that we have some amazing data collection projects that are happening right now. I personally know 2 midwives who are both compiling their breech birth outcomes. They're both home birth based midwives. They've both done over 500 vaginal breech births over their careers, plus another about 500 sets of twins, of which many were breech. And we will have so much more information about the safety profile of breech birth at home once we get this data analyzed. We'll have 1,000 plus data points just from these 2 providers alone, who do mostly, physiological upright breech birth, who have a consistent set of kind of training and skills and protocols that we can say, if you have this much education, or if you do these things, it's reasonably, you can reasonably expect this kind of outcome. So when that's published, hopefully not too far in the future, we will have a lot more information that we can actually say, here's what the safety looks like. Because right now it's just so hard to say, honestly. And the training and experience level of home birth providers is all over the place as far as their breech training and education. We do a lot of training and education as an organization. And right now, the majority of our attendees are midwives. And some of them are hospital-based and some of them are birth center-based, but a large number of those are home birth-based. And I give them all of the pats on the back for wanting to improve their skills and education, whether they want it to just for the occasional surprise breech, or they want it because they want to offer this as a thing that their clients can actually choose and plan for. And we're hoping that we can also motivate the hospital-based providers to want to gain this knowledge, because I would love for breech birth to be widely available in hospitals. Not that I want it to be banned from home, but I think that the 99% of women who are birthing in hospitals still deserve to have that option. Because to be honest, if you want a vaginal breech birth right now in almost any city in the United States, you have to go to a home birth provider, because the hospital people aren't doing it, which is totally insane, because they're the one, if you ask anybody based in a hospital, is it safe to have a breech baby at home? They're going to panic and say, no way, you're going to, it's dangerous. But then like, why won't you do it at the hospital? It's too dangerous. So they're, I'm sure that's the extent of the conversation a lot of times, but it's the home birth midwives that right now are showing up. They're willing to learn and they're willing to practice and improve their skills. And I'd say, great, that's wonderful. Now let's get the hospital providers on board. If you want to look at breech, even in terms of harm reduction, right? There's this philosophy like, okay, for example, when we're talking about like, opiate or, injection drug users, right? There's the idea of, should we have needle exchange programs, to make it safer for them? Some people say, well, we shouldn't because we're encouraging a dangerous behavior, but risk reduction or harm reduction philosophy says we have to accept the fact that these people are going to do this. Why don't we make it safer so that at least if they're going to use these drugs, we can decrease the risk of them in contracting an infectious disease. So even if you totally abhor the idea of breech birth at home or home birth in general, why don't you take the harm reduction approach and say, let's make breech birth as safe as we can? So let's educate everybody in our hospital. Let's make sure everybody's trained. Let's make sure that we don't push women into the home setting because because we're refusing to do it ourselves. Because frankly, that's what's happening. And if you're a provider who's hospital based and listening to this, first of all, thank you, because I know it's kind of a taboo topic and, on par with, eating babies for dinner, probably for a lot of people, if you're listening to this, maybe you're feeling a little bit uncomfortable, and that's probably a good thing. Maybe that means that you need to up your game a little bit, take some risks. Don't force women to take risks because you're too scared, right? That's what you're doing if you're not willing to be breech trained and offer that as an option. This is not to shame anybody, but it's to say, why, as a provider, your job, your ethical responsibility is to provide safe and skilled care to the people you take care of. If you're not even willing to learn how to do something safely, that to me indicates that you might need to change a little bit and be willing to educate yourself and to take some personal risks because you probably feel uncomfortable with it because you've been trained that it's very dangerous. You've been educated in a culture of fear. But why not? Why not at least learn the skills? Maybe you won't start out by offering planned vaginal breech birth, but maybe you would offer it to those, surprise breeches who come in 8 centimeters already feeling a little bit pushy, or a grand multip who's like, I got this, I've had 5 babies, just let me give it a chance. Maybe that's where you start, but at least consider starting, and don't be so scared that you're not even willing to learn the skills and to learn about how it works. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised by how beautiful a process breech birth can be and how it makes so much sense once you understand what it looks like and how it works, and you understand the mechanics and how this baby navigates its way through the pelvis. And I really think that if you take our training, not to say that we're the only one, but I think we're the only major organization in the US right now that's training, I think you'll be honestly quite surprised by how fun it is to learn and how fascinating it is. And it will demystify the process for you and probably make you a lot less scared for the eventual breech that's going to come on your door at some point. It's going to happen. So why not be prepared?
I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think that as providers, and I harp on this all the time, it is your job to offer your patients, your clients, the spectrum of care, whether you agree with that care or not. So whether you would choose breech birth for yourself or not, if you have agreed to be an obstetrician or a midwife that attends labors, then you have agreed to support this person in whatever they have chosen. And if you can't fulfill that, then at the end of the day, you're actually not meeting your job requirements. And that's how I wholeheartedly feel. I feel that every single provider should have to be trained in twin and breech and VBAC. You should be able to offer the entire spectrum. It doesn't have to be your specialty. And I would expect that some obstetricians would be specialized in breech and VBAC and twins, but every provider out there, in my opinion, if I ran the US medical system, would have to have experience and knowledge and training in the otherwise normal variations of birth. While VBAC can arguably be said it's not a normal variation, it is because of something that we've done before. So we do deserve to give those bodies a chance to go through the natural process, as if we maybe had not intervened last time, whether it was needed or not. Okay, so circling us back to what we can expect from the breech birth experience. Are we looking at a longer labor? Are we looking at longer push times? How is breech going to impact the actual physical labor part?
Yeah, as far as I know from the research, and this is a question that has not been well compared, like comparing the pattern of breech labors with cephalic labors, I don't think we can say with any certainty that breech is significantly different. There can be a wide variation, just like with the head down baby. Some labors are wham bam, thank you ma'am, and they're done in 4 hours. Some labors are putsy and they stop and they start, and you have a plateau and you take a break for a while, and some are 36 hours and some are 15 minutes. So breech labors can have as much variety as a cephalic labor, and the key aspect is the baby tolerating the labor well, and is the mother tolerating the labor well? And as long as mother and baby are sounding happy and doing okay, then just like with cephalic, I think you can tolerate a wide range of variation. I mean, I think that the big difference is that because breech births, as the baby's born past about the umbilicus, give or take, usually there often can be some cord compression in advance of the head being born. Not always, but you kind of expect that the last few moments of birth, there's going to be some cord compression. And I think the one concern would be that if the baby has already lost a lot of its reserves during labor and is already struggling, in advance of the expulsion stage, it might be harder for that baby to tolerate that cord compression and restriction of oxygenation at the very end if it's already been depleting its reserve and having a long a struggle beforehand. So that would probably be clinically the only thing that would be more concerning, because there might be a little bit more prolonged time where the baby doesn't have as much oxygen at the very end. Not always though, but that's one thing I would be concerned about. But that's something that's going to become apparent during labor, that the baby is really showing signs of distress, and not just like the occasional stray deceleration, but a pattern that's pretty evident that the baby is not doing well. But that's the same with cephalic, right? I mean, it's not like there's anything about breech that is necessarily that different in terms of the labor. And same with expulsion stage. I mean, if you're a first-time mom, you can expect it's going to take longer than a multip, right? Same with head down babies. We do know from some research that, in some German studies where they compared the average length of labor and pushing from frank breeches and non-frank breeches, it seems like frank breeches tend to take a little longer, not have any worse outcomes, but just that both stages seem to take longer compared to non-frank, like completes or incompletes. This has not been studied extensively, so it's hard to say if this is replicable in other centers. It's just this one center in Germany happened to study that, and they theorized, why is it that frank breeches tend to take longer, both for labor and for pushing, than a complete breech? So there's that, but otherwise, I don't know if I'd counsel people to expect anything predictably different, because labors can be so wide ranging in the first place. A good number of women report that it feels different when you actually have that pushing ejection reflex, because you don't have this hard bowling ball head pushing on everything. It's a little squishier. So people report that sometimes it just feels different when they push, and often the incredibly strong urge to push that you get, if you're not being coached, tends to come later in the process, sometimes at the very end. Now, this is kind of a general observation. It's not true for everybody, but you might feel a little different, and it might not quite feel as much like you have this great big bowling ball coming out. It might feel a little differently because it's not quite as hard with the thing that crowns or rumps. Yeah. So there's that. It might feel a little bit different. Some people say it feels about the same though, so it can vary, but that's one thing that you might be prepared for, something that feels a little bit different as it's rumping, as the baby's actually emerging through your perineum.
Sure. That's fascinating, but it makes so much sense if you think about the anatomy of our bodies and what it might feel like to push out a bum or feet rather than a head. It all makes so much sense. Okay, so my very last question is, let's start off with the very bold statement that just because you have a breech baby, you don't have to have a C-section. Obviously, that's what we've talked about this whole time. So let's wrap up with two things. If we have a breech baby, is there a better position, or are there better labor and birth positions than others? Obviously upright, but are there any positions that stand out? And then the last question is, if we are interested in breech birth, where do we find a provider? How do we start that search in finding someone who might be able to serve us if we have a breech baby?
Mm-hmm. So first off, what we know from the research about positions that optimize the breech birth process, we do know from the research that upright birth positions, so kneeling or standing or all fours, hands and knees, is better in terms of maternal outcomes, fewer maternal injuries. It's better in terms of neonatal outcomes, fewer neonatal injuries. It's better in terms of a lower C-section rate. It's better in terms of a lower need for using maneuvers to get the baby out. So the babies get stuck a lot less often when mom is upright versus on her back. And this comes from a large study from a German breech specialty center where they compared three things. They compared their planned C-section breeches with their planned vaginal breeches. And among the vaginal breeches, they compared outcomes when the woman was in a hands and knees position or upright in some form, standing, kneeling, versus on the back. in the traditional supine position. So they were able to compare these three. And it's really fascinating because the outcomes are so much better in pretty much every metric if the woman is in the upright position of her choice versus on her back. So we can pretty much say without any doubt that a supine position makes the birth longer. Oh yeah, and second stage was longer. So it makes the birth longer. It injures the mother more, it injures the baby more, it causes more babies to get stuck and need assistance, and it causes more of the vaginal births to quote unquote fail and move to cesarean section.
Wow.
So for every one of these reasons, you want to be birthing in an upright position if at all possible. But what I would not do is be dogmatic and be like, you must be on your hands and knees at this time, but just explain to the mother in advance, the outcomes are so much more beneficial to you and your baby in so many different ways if you're in some kind of an upright position of your choice. And you can say this could be standing, it could be kneeling, it could be an asymmetrical lunge, it could be squatting, whatever feels right for you. Because the women, if you ever labored and been in an environment where you were completely free to move and encouraged to really listen to your body's cues, you will know that there are certain positions that just feel better and that you could get drawn to. And there's certain that you cannot even conceive of the possibility of trying to do it. Like I could never have lain down during my 4 labors. It would have been unthinkable to lie down. I never did once, ever, and I know if you're based in a hospital, you're probably mostly used to seeing births on the back. That's what you've been trained to do. But with breech birth, it's essential that you know how to do breech births with the woman upright. That's the go-to default position. And that's the one that you should become comfortable with first. And you'll probably learn to love it. Upright birth is amazing. You have so much better visibility of the baby as it's coming out. And there's a lot of different things the breech baby does that you can't see if you're having the mother birth on her back, but you see super, super easily if she's on hands and knees or standing when you're behind her and looking at the birth from behind. Visibility is better, and the baby does all these different movements that you don't see when she's supine. And it actually helps you as a provider understand the process and reassure yourself that the steps that the baby's taking are normal. So yes, I would say encourage your client or your patient to be in whatever position she wants to, but especially encourage her to be in some kind of an upright position if she can at all find a comfortable one for her. And other than that, encourage her to move freely and change positions as much as she feels she needs to. There isn't like, it's not like we can say, oh, the Captain Morgan style position is the best position and you must stay in it the entire pushing stage, where one leg up and one knee on the floor, right? Or, hands and knees is the only good one, but upright position of your choice. That is what you should tell people. And you should, if you're in a hospital setting and doing breeches, you also need to have a conversation with your nursing staff so that they know the protocol is. Let the mom know that she should be in whatever position feels best, but especially encourage and facilitate an upright position, and so don't break the bed down and turn it into a reclining position with stirrups out, right? Don't do that. Just say, hey, do whatever you like. Standing up is better. Kneeling is better. Let me get you a birth ball. Let me raise the head of the bed so you can go on your knees and drape your torso over it. Maybe slow dance with your partner, whatever, so, I love upright breech birth and upright birth in general. And I'm hoping that if we can train enough people to do upright breech birth, it'll convince people that upright birth in general is so much fun and so much better. Yeah, it is so normal. I mean, as a person who's had 4 babies, all completely physiological, self-led, totally, inner directed the whole process. Nobody ever told me what to do at all. I can't imagine doing it any other way. And I was moving the whole time. Every labor, I was moving and upright and swaying and walking and squatting and sitting in a ball and doing hula hoops with my hips. And, the thought of being directed of how to hold my body is impossible. Nobody could have known better than me what my body needed to do and how it needed to move. And, it would change from contraction to contraction. So that's all I say is just tell your people, do whatever feels best and give yourself complete liberty to move and do whatever your body needs to do. And maybe if they're not used to seeing this because maybe they've grown up watching too much television and seeing women lying down, say that's not actually physiologically very normal, and show them pictures and videos of all the things women do as they're dealing with labor. And you just need an environment where you're free to really just move and dance and get that baby out. And if you're left to your own devices in a supportive environment, you're going to find what feels best, and you'll naturally do those things that help the baby come out. And it doesn't have to be this complicated process. It's just mostly giving the mental and emotional and physical freedom to move.
And a lot of that comes with safety. So if you're with a provider who does not feel safe and secure in their own skills of supporting a breech birth, you too are not going to feel safe with their care because you're going to pick up on their own fear. Their fear will transfer to you. I've seen it a million times. All right, Dr. Rixa, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. And to everyone out there, I hope that you check us out on Instagram, visit us on YouTube, or listen to the podcast. We will link all of the things that you need to get a hold of and look into all of the resources that we have from Dr. Rixa today. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Bye, y'all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. I love hanging out with you, and it is an honor to be your go-to gal when it comes to preparing for your baby. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a 5-star review and tell others why they should be listening to the Birth Lounge podcast too. You deserve to have a birth that you love with a provider that values your autonomy and respects informed consent without all the trauma that you so commonly hear about on social media. New episodes air every Wednesday and Friday. Hit that follow button so you never miss an episode. I'm HeHe, and this is the Birth Lounge Podcast.